This podcast is brought to you by TaxCalc. Tax, accounts and practice management software loved by accountants in firms of all sizes.
Welcome to the TaxCalc podcast of the TaxCalc webinar, Outsourcing, Advice, Anecdotes, Answers. Presented by Andy North and Dean Shepherd with special guests Kaz Driver and Ariona Bericurte. The original webinar was broadcast on the 19th of April 2023 and can be viewed at www.taxcalc.com/events. Please be aware that deadlines, rates and other technical details referenced may have changed since this date.
Good afternoon and welcome once again to TaxCalc TV. I'm Andy North, I'm the CMO here at TaxCalc, and as always I am joined by the great Dean Shepherd, the Director of Product Compliance here at TaxCalc. And today we are going to be looking at the subject of outsourcing, and outsourcing your work to an overseas partner. I should make it clear that here at TaxCalc we don't offer any outsourcing services and we don't have any commercial links with anyone who does either. So why are we covering this? Well, put simply, many of our customers are reporting that they're facing unprecedented struggles with recruitment. Pretty much every firm I've spoken to in the last 6 months has vacancies that they just can't fill. And a good proportion of those are often for the first time exploring overseas help to fill those gaps. But that option has caused some anxiety, with practice owners being unsure about what working with a third party who might be 4,000 miles away might actually be like. And how can they develop the trust that they need to be comfortable with that, and what unforeseen risks might crop up as well. So that's why we have recruited some very special guests. First of all, I want to thank Ariona Bericurte, who joins us once again from Majors Accounts to share her experiences of working with an outsourcing partner in Sri Lanka. Also welcome to Kaz Driver, who currently runs Little Big Marketing, providing marketing solutions to accountants. But in a previous life, she was the Director of Marketing for two of the UK's largest outsourcing providers. And hopefully, Kaz will be able to provide a very different perspective on how outsourcing can work. So before we start, there is always a little housekeeping. Our most frequently asked question is always, will there be a recording sent out at the end of this? And I'm going to go over to Dean for this one.
Yes, Andy, there will absolutely be a recording sent out. Very shortly after the end of the webinar, you'll be able to log back in and see that playback at your leisure.
Thanks, Dean. Worth every penny. We love to hear your questions and we will try to answer as many as we can, both at the end and throughout the discussion. So if you do have anything that crops up, anything you want clarified and you want the panel to see that, please put that in the question and answer section, the Q&A box at the bottom right-hand corner. If you have a comment that you want to share with the rest of the viewers, but not necessarily with us, you can use the chat option. But we possibly and probably won't be seeing that during the actual session. So let's get to the subject at hand. I want to go over to Kaz. In terms of the definitions, we're using the term outsourcing, and I know there are a number of different permutations. Kaz, what are the options? If you're an accountant, what are the different types of outsourcing that you can be doing?
Well, outsourcing is essentially getting another body to undertake some of your work, and it can be as simple as finding a local bookkeeper and they'll do the bookkeeping for your clients, or it could be much greater services from the UK. So there's a number of companies within the UK that provide outsourcing services, or there is offshoring, and offshoring is where you're using businesses that are in another country. So India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Philippines, there's companies all over the world that will provide accounting outsourcing services for you, and they will do exactly the same as you will be doing yourself. So they should be providing a whole range of different accounting services. Outsourcing is somebody else doing the work, but offshoring is getting that work done by a company that's based in another country.
And what's the relationship then? Because are you actually employing necessarily an individual overseas, or what's that commercial relationship look like?
The main options are you can have what's called a full-time employee. So you basically have a person appointed to you, or a number of people, or a team of people working for your company, or you can buy time. You can buy a certain number of hours, so that could be a set number of hours a month, which normally there's great flexibility, which can be really handy for you because you're not going to know exactly how many hours you want to use each month. So most of the outsourcing companies will provide a range of hours and options for you. And you can buy set hours or you can buy varying hours, and they will have a different cost associated with them.
And so will you have necessarily the same person working for you all of the time, or is it a kind of anonymous, faceless service being provided?
If you go for the full-time employee option, that will be a person who is appointed for you, and if that person has a holiday, because they are allowed to have holidays, they will be a replacement. So there'll be somebody else, a known person that so they can become part of your team. That's the idea. They become an integral part of your business. If you're on an hourly model, then that will be normally a team of people. So I mean, you'll probably find the same people cropping up. It will be a similar team, but you won't get that consistency if you go for just the hours option.
Okay, and is there a sense that one type is more popular, or is it really just a horses for courses?
It's horses for courses, and it's going to depend on the amount of work that you want. And I mean, what normally happens is somebody will start with maybe with hours, and then realise that those hours it's going to be cheaper for them to have a full-time employee, and that will build up into a small team of people that support your business. And that's actually when outsourcing is most efficient and effective for you, because the way we promoted it was your team sitting in the office next door. I mean, obviously they're not next door, they're in another country, but that was the objective, was to get a team of people that work really closely with your own team in-house, to be as efficient and effective as possible.
Yeah, I know that's certainly something that has been raised, that I've heard, and I was doing some polling on the Accountants and Bookkeepers Facebook group, and one of the most common concerns people had was, how do you build that trust and relationship up? So we will absolutely be coming on to that. Thanks very much for that introduction. It's useful to get a good baseline here. We would like to ask you a question. I'm going to hand over to Dean for the poll.
Okay, thank you, Andy. I've just made that poll live on the screens. Hopefully that's popped up for you. If it hasn't appeared in front of you, then just go next to the the questions and the chat panels. You should find the poll panel there. So the question I'm asking is, what is your current experience of outsourcing accounting work overseas? And the options we've got there are: you are completely against it right now, you're considering it, but you do have concerns, and hopefully we'll address some of those concerns today. You have outsourced and it was a fantastic experience, or a great experience. I'm sorry, not a great experience. You've outsourced and it's not been a great experience, or you have outsourced and it's been a great success. So complicated to read out, but hopefully quite simple for people to answer there and submit their votes. I guess, Ariona, what would your answer be to that poll?
Well, currently with our offshoring, we've had a great experience so far. I think that's from the way that we've approached it. But yeah, I've heard all kinds of stories over the years. But yeah, so far for us, it's been a great experience.
And when you went into it, what would you say your biggest fear was, or your biggest concern was?
There were so many. I think we were influenced from the horror stories that I'd heard from so many other practitioners. There's the fear of loss of control, of data, of what your team are doing, loss of communication between us and them, but also with our clients as well. So there are a number of things that we were kind of worried about. But one thing that we knew before we went into it was that we did not want to hand out pieces of work to be worked on. And that's one thing that I was kind of clear on, because I'd heard from other people that one day they'd have one person working on a piece of work and then the next day it could be somebody else. But you don't have consistency and experience from that team member of understanding what your client does. And you may end up with the same questions being asked each quarter, for example, right, if it was a VAT return. So that's one thing that I guess helped us in being clear of what we wanted to do going into it.
Okay, well, we're going to be hearing the whole gamut of Ariana's story very shortly. But how's the poll coming along?
Yeah, a varied response here. So about half the people on the call that have responded said they're considering it, but they do have concerns. And I think we'll address lots of those concerns in the session today. Almost 25% have outsourced, and it's been a great success. So that's really good to hear. 17% have had not such a great experience. So please do share those experiences in the chat, and I can bring those into the conversation as well. And we do have a small number, around 10%, that are currently completely against it. So it'd be interesting to see if anybody there changes their mind by the end of this webinar or not.
And to be clear, we are not here to change anyone's mind. We're not here to advocate for outsourcing or deter people from outsourcing, merely to give people a better picture of what it might be like. And that's really what we're hoping to get from Mariona. So you just talking there about that. If you could just give us and the listeners a picture of what your firm was like and what happened and why you decided to go down this route.
Yeah, of course. So our firm, traditionally all of our employees were in the office. We never allowed them to work outside, again because of the worry about data being transmitted outside of our control, and ensuring that we are able to see what's going on. And our clients as well, they wanted to see that we had our team members there. But I think one thing that changed that mindset for us was COVID. We had no choice during COVID. We had to allow our team to work from home. We were busier than ever, so if we were going to hope to still be standing when COVID finished, we needed to carry on and allow them to work from home. So after we kind of got used to everybody working from outside of the office, we put systems in place for, communicating with each other, our IT, ensuring that all the computers are protected and so on. Then I was more open to considering offshoring.
So you probably wouldn't have done it had COVID not changed the environment. It probably wouldn't have happened. And I think that's quite common as well.
Yeah, I think that's the case for most people. Honestly, if it hadn't been for COVID, I wouldn't have considered it. Even if somebody would start talking to me about it, I'd say, sorry, not interested, especially if it was a different country. So I started to obviously warm up to this, and I contacted with a team in Sri Lanka, and I just wanted to dabble, kind of just put our toes in the water to see what it's about. So we took on 2 full-time employees in Sri Lanka. This was in November 2021, and I was shocked at the quality of the team members we took on. They had 7 years UK experience at some of the big 4 firms, so automatically for me I thought, okay, if they worked for the big 4, then hopefully they should be good enough for us.
So how many staff do you have
now?
Well, but when you started at that point,
we had about 20 I think at that time as well.
20 then, and they were all in the UK.
Every single one was in the UK.
I think you're just outside the big 4.
Yeah,
I think
slightly.
just outside.
Slightly. So when we kind of brought them into the team, as with any team member, it takes time for them to find their feet, but we have that in the UK as well. We'll employ people, and even if they have all the experience in the world, when they join, we need to get them used to how we work, because every practice essentially has different processes. So in that kind of instance, there was nothing different, essentially. They were just sitting in a different office, but the process to onboarding them and getting them used to how we do things was exactly the same, but slightly different in terms of they had a lot of the experience. So where in the UK, everyone knows it's difficult to find staff, so we were literally training from zero, they actually had quite a lot of knowledge. So our experience was amazing because it made it easier for them to almost hit the ground running when they joined. And unfortunately, during 2022, as I think everybody went through the Great Resignation, we were hit by that massively. The majority of our team, by the end of 2022, so I was just about to go on maternity leave at that point, and nearly everyone in our UK team left. I think we've got about 5 people left out of that 20. So we tried at the start, because we could see what was happening, so we started to try and recruit people. We just couldn't find the right people to join us. And people that were coming were without experience, that wanted double the amount of pay that we would expect to give them. So we thought, okay, let's start employing more people. Seeing as it went well with 2 people, let's start employing more people in Sri Lanka. So that's what we've done. I think now we're up to a team of about 15 in Sri Lanka within a
15
year.
people in Sri Lanka, right? Okay.
Yeah, but they are integrated as another member of our team here. There is no difference in terms of where they are sitting. We have portfolio managers, they have access to clients, so they can speak to clients on the phone. Clients now will call and say, I want to speak to X person. They know that that is their kind of manager. They deal with everything for that client.
Right.
That person sits in Sri Lanka.
And do your clients know that
They do.
Sri Lanka?
They do. And we've just said this is an extension of, what's happened during COVID, essentially. If you're frank with them, they understand. When you put it to them that actually during COVID we did the exact same thing. This is now what life has become. This is an expectation of how people want to work anyway. So there's no difference. Your service is not going to get affected. If anything, now we've got team members that have a lot more experience anyway. So for them, they haven't found a difference with language barrier either, because I was worried about the language barrier, but there hasn't been one at all, because their English is great, both written and oral. So we've had a positive experience overall, I'd
That's
say.
wonderful.
Yeah.
That's great, because I'm fascinated by the story about the staff, because I remember when that first happened, you were telling me about that, and I thought that was a really interesting point. And we'll come on to this later, because we want to talk about the impact on staff and the impact on clients. But just from your day-to-day life, how different is it now? Would you point to any significant differences between before COVID and now with a remote team?
To be honest, not really. I mean, with our team, they would work some days in the office. So if I wanted to speak to them, I may have had them there, but I didn't go into the office as much either. So to be honest, there hasn't been much of a difference at all. As long as you've got that internal communication in place and it's solid, then there shouldn't really be a difference at all.
No difference. And what about trust? Because this is something that came up in various conversations. It's how can I genuinely trust someone if they're 4,000 miles away? Now, I've never met them, and you've not met your team over there yet, personally.
Yeah, I was lucky in terms of I know somebody in the UK that kind of set up this firm,
right.
And I've worked with them for many years, so I'm lucky in that I trust her. But we've had so many conversations with the team and the managers in Sri Lanka as well. They're amazing people, and they try their utmost to work 100% and do their best for us. We can tell they go above and beyond. And in a way, having those managers there, they almost act as if we were there. They're keeping an eye on our team, so they've got our best interests at heart, because they want more people obviously in their offices. But they're if we say this team member, I've messaged them, they're not answering, within a second we'll get an answer. They may have just gone to get a cup of tea, for example. Yeah. We don't know that. I guess they're the only kind of barriers, but they could be 10-15 minute intervals.
Right. So
it's not, yeah.
And how do you deal with, so your employees over there are not working for anybody else?
No, yeah, they're just ours.
And what about like holiday? Do you just...
Yeah, they have holidays like everyone we had here.
Right.
So if they're on holiday, they're on holiday. They're on leave. It's how we've set them up. So just like we had here, we have teams dealing with different industries. So within each team, there's 3-4 people. So if one's away, they just organise their holidays with each other to make sure that they can cover each other's work if a client calls. Right. But at least there will be a minimum of one person in that team who will know everything that's going on for a particular group of clients. So yeah, not much different to what we had here essentially.
Wow, okay, so a very, very similar experience from Ariona. And you mentioned a point there, and Kaz, I'd like to quickly go to a question for you. And you mentioned this when we were speaking a little while ago about the capacity overseas, because from what I understand that some of the challenges that we've got over here are kind of almost spilling over there in terms of people, there just simply being enough people to do this work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and it's in certain locations as well. Whereas at Ahmedabad, for example, there's quite a number of outsourcing companies now, and they're tending to try and poach staff. So they have their own internal issues. But then a number of the bigger outsourcers have taken on their own or set up their own training establishments. So they may be ACCA accredited as well to undertake training. So they will be bringing people up and into their companies. And they've also sort of like expanded. I mean, my expertise is within India, but they're sort of like expanded into the different cities to ensure that they've got a good pool of accountants to provide the services that are necessary. But yes, I mean they're a victim of their own success really, because of the number of accountancy practices, of sort of offshore accountancy services that are being set up, and there is obviously a limit from a numbers perspective as to how many accountants you can recruit.
So do you think there is a case of saying if you want to do it, get in quick in that respect, that the supply may run thin overseas too?
Yes and no. I mean, I think the bigger established firms are going to be a better option. I think the difficulty is, and I know we're going to sort of talk about this in a little while, but there are quite small barriers to entry. You know, if you're an accountant in another country and you've got some contacts, you could legitimately provide outsourced offshore services to people. Yeah, I mean, there's going to be a different level of the quality of that service. But I think this is half the problem that a number of businesses have set up, and people have been working in one of these companies and go and set their own one up, and think they're going to be able to offer exactly the same services that their former employer was, and suddenly realise that they can't do that at all because of the technical requirements, because of the knowledge, because of all the other things that they actually need to have in place. But yes, I mean, to go back to your original point, yes, there is in some countries a notable shortage because of the growth in the industry.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, I guess it's inevitable, and it's fairly small scale. I know it's probably around the same kind of percentage of firms are using outsourcing in the States as well. But yeah, there is only a finite resource. Thanks, Cass. So, Dean, as well, when you were running a firm, you had just give us a quick overview of your experience.
Yeah, sure. I mean, when I started looking at outsourcing, my firm wasn't, 20 people deep like Ariona's was. I started looking at when I was just a sole practitioner on my own, working from home. The only person I employed was an admin assistant. So I was building up my client numbers, and I got to the point where I really need some assistance, but I didn't feel like I had enough revenue coming in to justify a full-time employee. So as difficult as it is to find full-time members of staff with experience, it's probably even more difficult to find part-time people with the right type of experience that can kind of help you manage those ebbs and flows. So that's when I really started looking at outsourcing as an option to manage the extra work that I wanted bring in without the commitment of a full-time member of staff and feeling that pressure of I really need to bring in client numbers quickly. I guess it was quite a short-lived experiment, I would say. I think it did work quite well, but I wasn't in the position to be having full-time people overseas, so I didn't get that kind of advantage of them learning the way I want to do things because I'm giving the feedback as I go on. So submitting. You were doing
the hours?
Yeah.
The kind of by the hour?
Yeah, well, I was doing it by job. So I basically submit a job into a portal that then gets picked up by a team. So I'm introduced to all the team. I know everybody that could potentially be working on any of the jobs that I submit, but I won't know who picks it up. And really, I won't know when either. I know one of the questions that came in asked about turnaround times, and someone had experimented here and said that turnaround times were quite slow. I didn't find that actually, because another motivation for me was I wanted to turn around my work within a certain period of time to kind of maintain standards that my clients had expected. But I was also conscious that because I'm doing most of the work, the jobs get done as they come in. I can't get jobs going concurrently. So I actually was motivated by, well, as soon as a job comes in, I can submit it to the team and it can get started on straight away, which I think by and large did work. Those jobs did get started on pretty quickly, so I could turn them around quicker. But in the end, I kind of found that and bearing in mind this is all pre-COVID and pre-working with people remotely and clients being used to that kind of setup as well, I found that actually I'd managed to find some pretty decent subcontractors locally that I could put that work out to, and the price differential wasn't that much different between the two options. And I thought, well, you know what, they're local, they're doing a good job. I feel like I can have greater control because they're physically close to me. So I ended up going the subcontractor route locally until I got enough client numbers in, and then I sort of built up a UK team.
But that was more expensive? I mean, how did that?
I would say, slightly more expensive. I thought the price differential would be quite big. I'd be interested to know from Mary owner's perspective what the kind of price differential is, because I'm not employing the whole range of staff that you would need to support your full client base. It was there's no doubt about it, it's certainly cheaper overseas. The headline kind of hourly rate you get, you think, wow, this is going to save me a huge amount. But actually the local subcontractors that I found, it wasn't,
wasn't too much.
It wasn't a huge saver. But bearing in mind, I'm talking about, one person.
And they were doing tax accounts, bookkeeping?
Primarily doing the accounts job from start to finish.
Right.
We didn't do bookkeeping at all, so that was all outsourced to other UK bookkeeping operation. And actually that wouldn't have mattered to me particularly how that operation did the bookkeeping. They could well have been outsourcing everything they're doing for me, but from my perspective I was just engaging that third-party bookkeeping firm to do it. But no, for me it was just the accounts jobs, and we would do the tax at our side, which again, because I'm not directly controlling an individual, I didn't get them doing like everything about the job, and certainly not the client contact all the way through. I'm just selecting specific jobs as they come back to me with the accounts.
And were you ever uncomfortable from a trust perspective? Did that ever raise its head with you?
I wasn't uncomfortable. The firm I chose to go with, I evaluated maybe 3 or 4 different firms, and looked at their operation, how long they'd been established, what other accountants in the UK were using them. I'd spoke to other accountants that were using them. They gave me a lot of information about the security aspects and how that worked. I have to say I'm not qualified to assess how strong or not those security aspects were, but they certainly talked a good game, and they had, there was lots of firms in the UK that I thought, no, these are good, respectable firms. They would have done due diligence on the security side of things. So I felt perfectly comfortable from that perspective. I was probably a little less comfortable with what the client perception might be of outsourcing.
Yeah.
Which I feel bad about, because I always tell people, don't make assumptions about what your clients might think. You're seeing it through your own lens. So,
and you did exactly that.
And I did exactly that. So, yeah.
But was there any pushback?
Clients were largely unaware, I have to say.
Right.
So I adjusted my letters of engagement and terms and conditions to say that I do use outsourced services. So it's there in the fine detail, but you know how many clients go through the letter of engagement. I'm sure, I can't remember specifically, but I'm sure some clients would have asked, because you've always got clients that will go through everything with fine detail. I don't recall anybody specifically rejecting my services because of that, or having particular conversations about it. But then I wasn't so open about the setup. And because I still managed all the client contact, they wouldn't necessarily have known who was doing the job. Even if it was somebody, a subcontractor locally, they also wouldn't have had any relationship with that person and wouldn't have known that it was somebody else doing it.
Cool. So you, in terms of the finances, you say it was pretty much maybe a slight bit cheaper in the long run than a UK.
Oh, it was definitely cheaper, but I think for me it wasn't the huge saving that.
What are you talking percentage-wise? If you're happy to share.
If I recall, it was probably about 20% cheaper all in all. The local subcontractors I found were very quick, so the jobs actually took longer to be done overseas, even though the hourly rate was cheaper. But again, that's probably because I hadn't invested enough time in training people to do things my way and hadn't given them the opportunity to learn my way of doing things. So obviously for the first, same with anyone you employ locally, for a certain period of time, they're going to take longer because they need to, adjust to the way that you do things.
Were you having to do a lot of tidy up, review work?
Yes, and I was always told, if anybody thinks that you can just dump the work off and it'll come back as a perfect accounts job, and you pay, I don't know, £10 an hour or something, and then you get this wonderful piece of work back, then that's not how it works. I was always told from the very outset that to treat that service as if it's a semi-senior doing the work, and then you're reviewing it internally. So they will have they'll have a whole team. So they'll have juniors prepare it. It will always be reviewed by a qualified chartered accountant with experience. Then it comes back to me, but I should treat that as
a semi-senior coming back, and you would then tidy that up and do the review.
Yeah. How does that differ with your experience there, Andy? Because obviously you're employing people
Yeah, I
at the
mean,
time.
initially we did have their work all reviewed in the UK by our team here, but that was just whilst they were getting used to our processes. But in time we found that actually the experience and the knowledge they had sometimes was better than the team we had here, and they were teaching our team here.
Wow, right.
So obviously those people now are kind of department heads, and they're the ones that are doing all of the reviewing, and it still goes to 3 or 4 different levels of review anyway. And then we'll have someone in the UK that does spot checks just to make sure that generally everything is okay. But we've also employed a practice manager over there who's got 9 years of UK experience, and their knowledge is unreal, and he mostly now does training more than anything else, reviewing and training. That's all. He doesn't have any access to clients because we're focusing on just ensuring that everybody's knowledge kind of is at the same level if possible.
So bring me on to another question. I did want to ask you about the savings that you made, but when you talk about that you've employed a practice manager, are they kind of coming to you as if with ideas about, let me do that, and their own personal development? No,
absolutely. So I give them free rein to employ who they think is right for the practice. If they want to get rid of somebody because they're not right for the practice, they can do. If they want certain time to train X person because they feel that there are knowledge gaps, they can do that. So it's exactly the same as they would have done here. And sometimes at the start they would ask me, shall I employ this person or that person? Do you want to speak to them? I do like to get to know them. For me, it's more of a chat just to see what kind of person they are, because technically they go through quite a rigorous interview stage with exams and things like that. But at the end of the day, I want him with the department head who's going to work with that individual to interview them and see whether they are right for what we need or not, because they need to ensure that they can communicate with each other,
So it really is kind of an autonomous setup over
Yeah.
there. Fantastic. And then I do have to ask, in terms of the savings that you made, was it similar to Dean's?
The savings for us, I think the biggest savings has been on the employer's NI. Obviously, because they're employed not directly by us, so they're through a company who invoice us each month. So that has been a major saving, especially as the team we had here, they're all on high salaries. So we were paying a hell of a lot. I'd say, to give it an idea, somewhere around the £7,000 to £10,000 a month saving just on that tax.
Right.
Yeah.
Significantly. So what overall would you give a percent? Would it be the 20? Would it be more than that? Or?
No, for us it's been, I'd say more than the
than
20%, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Fabulous. Thank you very much for sharing that. Okay, so we are going to, how are we doing for time? Yeah, we're okay. So we're going to be looking at, in the second part, the security issues that you need to take into account, the relationship building with your provider. We're going to be looking at the impact on the clients and on staff as well. But we do have another question for you. So Dean, would you open the poll?
Yes, thank you, Andy. I've just made that poll live, so hopefully if you found the last one, you'll find this one too. The question we're going to ask here is, what is your biggest concern when it comes to outsourcing? So the options we've got there are data security issues that we'll certainly be touching upon, the impact on your existing team if you have a UK team as well, client perception, that was something that concerned me. Is that your biggest concern for outsourcing? managing costs and having the time to implement the change. So cast your votes there. If there are other things that we haven't come up with that are actually bigger concerns for you, then do pop those into the chat and we'll bring that into the conversation as well.
While we're waiting, Dean, I've been looking at the chat there. There's quite a lot in there. Is there anything that you want to bring up in particular, or should we just move on? Because there were some questions.
I think there were lots of interesting questions that are going to come up in the
other
sections
bits
that we got, and I think Ariona asked a couple. But interestingly, I'm going to throw Ariona on the spot with a tax question here. We did have a question asking about IR35 and whether there's advantages of not for engaging an outsourced company overseas rather than using subcontractors locally, and whether that crossed your mind.
Subcontractors, not necessarily linking to IR35. I'm going to talk more about subcontractors here in the UK. There was that issue of, for us, they have access to the clients here, and there is that worry of poaching and things like that. So that's why, another kind of reason why we didn't go ahead with the subcontractors here. But IR35 wasn't really something that was a main consideration for us before we started to offshore.
Yeah. It's interesting you say about the poaching thing, because actually when I started my practice, I was also doing a bit of subcontracting for other firms while I was getting my clients in, and it simply wouldn't have occurred to me to try and take any of their clients. I mean, I'm subcontracting with somebody else, but actually I did have a number of sort of local bookkeepers that I would, because I didn't offer bookkeeping in-house, that I'd recommend to my clients. And I remember one of those approaching me and saying, oh, the client has actually approached me to do all the end of year stuff as well, but I wanted to check I didn't approach them, I wanted to check you're okay, because they're going to sign up with me. Yeah. And I was like, okay, that's fine, that's the client's decision at the end of the day, but that will end our relationship. I won't be sending any more work in your direction. Whereas the other bookkeepers I work with, respected the fact that I'm bringing work to them, and they would see it as unprofessional to try and poach the client in that way. But
unfortunately, there aren't. It's difficult to find people who are that trustworthy. We've had, I think, in the past we may have used one or two subcontractors sporadically, not often, where we just got really busy, and in the end we did have a group of clients that would go to them. And obviously that ended the relationship straight away, as it did with you. But that's kind of one of the reasons why we didn't go ahead with the subcontractor here. It just seemed like too much of a hassle, and always having that in the back of your mind, like, what if,
So how's the poll gone?
Okay, so the most popular concern there is around the data security issue. So 37% of respondents have listed that as their biggest concern when it comes to outsourcing. Client perception also quite high, and then next up, having time to implement the change, but that's much lesser. So yeah, data security and client perception, the two big concerns. Yeah,
and I think that's the same in all the conversations I've had as well. Quality of work is another one that comes up, and I think the conversations we've had, and generally speaking, people I've spoken to have not really had a problem with the quality of work at all. Not saying that it's always plain sailing, but that doesn't seem to be an issue when you get into the reality of it. But data security, a very, very important issue. And Kaz, I'd like to take this to you first of all. If I was for the first time looking to outsource my work to an overseas provider, what are my concerns? What should my concerns be, and how can I tell if the company I'm using is secure?
Yeah, data security is always going to be the number one concern. You want to make sure whoever you're going to work with has got a really good IT team that understands what needs to be done, and you also need to make sure that your client's data isn't going to end up in the other country, because that actually is going to contravene data protection, because you would have to inform your clients that their data, or data that is can identify somebody as being taken out of the country and going to a third country. So you want to make sure that the data is they can set up remote desktop working, so they can work actually within your your confines of your systems, your servers, and they should be able to help you with that. Or they can work on the cloud, and so they would need the same software as you've got, and then they can provide their services on the cloud. You would have to give them your logins, but they will actually use your system. So it is no difference to your team working in in the UK to undertake that work. There shouldn't therefore be such concern from a client perspective either, because the data isn't going anywhere else. It's actually being worked on within the normal confines that you would be working yourself, or if you were outsourcing within the UK, you'll be doing exactly the same thing. So you need to make sure that the data isn't going to go out of the UK, that they're not taking that data and working on it in the other country. They need to be able to work on it in this country, and they need to be able to have the expertise to be able to do that. From a physical perspective as well, I mean, the majority of the bigger respectable outsourcers will have security guards at the doors. They will have all the systems in-house. You won't be able to take data from the systems that they're working on, so they won't be able to download anything. Phones invariably have to be handed in as you go into the building. There's security passwords, there's cameras. I mean, it really is very top level. And in fact, what we used to say from a marketing perspective is the security provided by the outsourcing firms is invariably going to be tighter than you have yourselves. They're going to have all the security systems, software, and be able to make sure that there are no data breaches. As I said, the really critical thing is that data doesn't go out, doesn't leave the UK, other than going to the cloud, but within your own systems, software.
And in your experience, I mean, I know you worked for some of the larger providers out there, and they were genuinely taking that security very, very seriously. And they had, because I know a lot of the times when you look at the websites for these providers, they will have, here's the keyless entry and fingerprint security to get in. You don't necessarily know whether that's actually switched on, but you, in your opinion, in your experience, they were taking that ultra seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was critical with the security, because if that company has a data breach, then they've lost their business, because nobody will then trust them with anything. So that was absolutely critical, and that's why I know a number of other providers have gone down the ISO route. GDPR made a huge difference to the services that could be provided. When there are still providers that will take the data out of the country and work on it, technically you should tell your client that data has been is being worked on in another country, and that's why you really should make sure, absolutely categorically, that doesn't happen. But yeah, I mean, and the other thing, which is what we would encourage people to do, which is okay if you've got a large account, is actually go out and visit them. Go and see what the systems are like out there, because then you can see the logging in, that all the restrictions there are on the employees, to make sure that they are going to provide a very secure service to their clients.
And I mean, on the other side of this, I've heard of people where they've literally just been employing people outside of a third-party provider, where they've simply just recruited someone overseas, and that person could be working from their own home. And from what I'm gathering, that's probably not a good idea.
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, security is critical, and it's so easy these days to get access if you're not using proper secure systems I mean, you need all that security around them as well, which is why I started by saying you need to use businesses that have got good IT teams that can actually help you to get your systems set up as well. I mean, quite often you will end up with a much more secure system yourself than you started out with, because a lot of people, data protection, data security, it's not something that's really high on people's lists of things that they need to do. Oh, we'll be okay. But yeah, absolutely, never ever let your data just be sent out willy-nilly to people and businesses that actually haven't got the proper processes and procedures in place to protect it.
Are there any just like urgent red flags that if I'm looking to do this, would you give me one thing? Just look for this to keep you safe, or can it be boiled down to that level?
Well, yeah, it can be. I mean, I've looked at a number of websites all the time, and quite a number of them are clearly saying that they will take the data and process it in their country.
Right, so that's the priority. Okay, fine, fabulous, thank you. And Ariona, have you had any issues with the security, I suppose?
No, we haven't, although we do regularly train the team on GDPR and ensuring, because we have clients that will still ask for things by email. So for us, it's just making sure that our team are aware. So at the moment, every 3 months, I'm doing a refresher. Like, guys, don't listen to the client. You know what our processes are, just in case.
Yeah.
You know, the clients can be quite difficult in asking for that information. So it's just kind of just reassuring them they need to follow our processes and not do anything else.
And there was we have had some questions in about tax calc, because tax calc. Our solution is obviously you're going to need Cloud Connect, and if you've got Cloud Connect,
I mean, Kaz raised the point that you'll need if you want to allow an outsourcer to access client data that's held locally on the cloud securely, then Cloud Connect is probably the obvious solution from tax calc perspective. Data's in the cloud; it's in a very secure UK data center, and logins can be provided to the appropriate people that need access to that data, and only to them, and restrict access as necessary, and use multi-factor authentication as well. So
you've got that security. So that is one thing. I do know if you are using the desktop version of TaxCalc, you can use a hosted desktop solution, but I think that's ultimately going to be a bit more complex and a bit more expensive as well. So. Okay, fabulous. Thank you very much for that one. We are running a little bit short of time. What I'd like to just cover with, well, all three of you really, is generally speaking, building a relationship with your provider, building a relationship between your particularly your staff and your provider, and also your clients as well. How did that go? Because you said you had some issues.
With the provider initially, it was ensuring that they understand how we work in the UK in terms of urgency. So it took some time for them to understand. When we say we want it now, that means realistically yesterday. So they're used to doing things at a lot slower pace. They take life generally a bit slower.
Right.
So that was kind of an initial issue, but it's working on that now. They understand, what we need when we say we need it now. One of the biggest issues, I would say, which I did not foresee, was the team in the UK. Because initially when we started, we wanted the team in Sri Lanka to do more of the back end things, the bookkeeping, bringing it up to a position where the team in the UK can just review to make sure that it makes sense, it's okay, and then work on the relationship with the client. So in my eyes, that was a much more kind of interesting job, and considering how much time they spend studying, and the difficult kind of exams are translating the figures and communicating with the client and seeing how we can make a difference. Unfortunately, the team in the UK did not see it that way. They saw it as, this is a threat, you're planning to get rid of us, so they jumped ship. No matter how much I would say to them, please train them, take this work off of your desk and do other things. I want you to do more important things. But they just didn't see it that way, and it got to a point where they were holding on to the work and not passing it to the team in Sri Lanka. But there's only so much work you can do, and then you'll get tired and burnt out. No matter how much I said don't do it, you can't change people's mentality, unfortunately. So a lot of them did jump ship. Those that have stayed have embraced it, and they are loving it, because their job role has changed. It's a lot more interesting for them. But that is one of the most difficult things that I did not foresee going into this.
Because you lost, how many was it?
15. So 75% of our team.
Now imagine that. Imagine losing 15%, 75%.
Who we've trained for 8-9 years, who've been with us through thick and thin. They've lasted through the digitalisation process, and we've put them through their education as well. So it was a shame to lose all of that knowledge. But at the end of the day, there's only so much you can do.
So what advice would you have for someone who may happen to be watching a webinar, for example, about this subject? what advice would you give them about, I mean, is it something you could have, do you think, prepared them better for, or was that inevitable?
I think the only thing that I could have done is maybe before making the decision to go ahead, speak to them about it, warm them up to the idea, and get them involved in the conversations that I had with the offshoring company. So they are aware, you know, exactly what happens every step of the way. They know as much as I do.
Right.
Because maybe they could have thought the conversations that I had with the offshoring company were different to what I was telling them.
Yeah.
That, in hindsight, that's kind of what I'm thinking could have happened. So maybe having them there from the very start with every conversation, and helping with the setup, me not pushing it, getting the team to push it, I think that would have made a difference.
So actually, going through that, because you can understand why they might feel a little bit unsettled, and potentially also sending them out there or all going together.
Yeah, that's kind of what we were planning to do this year, but it's not something that we wanted to do straight away.
Right.
We wanted to kind of get used to the team, but I didn't foresee that it was going to happen so quickly. This is something that we wanted to last quite a few years before we had such a big team, just to do it slowly, but things happen, you have to kind of pivot. The famous word that we've used during COVID as well, but yeah.
There's been a lot of pivoting going on. Oh. and Dean, you didn't have staff, so you...
No, so I didn't have the staff issues to deal with from that perspective. But I think anybody that does have staff, when I did have staff, you find some people are creatures of habit. So they get comfortable in their role, and then if they feel like their role is going to change, they suddenly get very concerned about what it might become and whether that's really what they want to be doing. I suppose the difficulty is if you set up the firm one way and then you're making quite a big change, there are going to be people that you know that's not going to work out for them because they're creatures of habit. I think, like Ariana says, if like new members of the team coming on board, they realise, look, this is how we work. This is what it's going to mean for you. This means your role can be doing these things rather than these things. Then it's probably in a better place now when you're recruiting people.
Well, I think it's interesting, and it was an observation that Kaz and I, we were talking, Kaz, about how I remember going back, say, 12, 15 years when outsourcing really started to take off in the UK, it was being presented as a kind of practice transformation tool where you would take that model of outsourcing your expensive work, sending it to somewhere overseas so you can then focus on added value services and advisory, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you can understand why so therefore Ariona's team felt that they might be victims of that, I guess, potentially. But now it is much more just about, I mean, the way I'm hearing about it is much more people just saying, I can't find staff over here, and that's quite new.
Yeah, so a real change in motivation, and it's a needs must, because for a lot of accountants, they can't grow their business. They may not even be able to continue with the clients they've got because there's such a difficulty in recruiting people now. And outsourcing is much better accepted now. And certainly when I first started, there weren't that many people outsourcing, and there were some real horror stories. And so the outsourcing companies themselves have got better. There is still the option of changing the way your practice operates and taking on new business because you've outsourced. I mean, it like bookkeeping. A lot of accounting practices don't do bookkeeping because it's such a pain. But it means that you could offer that service as well because you can outsource it. But the motivating factor, there is a need to take on or to look at and consider outsourcing because you can't run your practice. I mean, it was quite interesting listening to what Ariana was saying about how the differences, what that she could have done with making a difference with integrating the team, and I would absolutely endorse that 100%, of making sure that your team are completely involved in what's going on. And we used to quite frequently send over one of the team members from India to actually work with the accountancy practice in the UK, so they could get to know them, maybe put some of their fears to rest, and maybe also let them talk to other clients who we're already working with, to help them to understand that it doesn't mean they're going to lose their job at all. It means that potentially their job is going to be a lot more interesting and less stressful, and maybe they will, be able to go home at 5:30 and not have to stay till 7 o'clock every night because they've got so much work to do.
Do you think, though, and I guess, and this is probably going to be the final question before we go to the audience questions, there's that notion of, yes, I'm going to strategically outsource overseas is one thing. If you're taking someone on that you might then find a member of staff 6 months down the line, and then you'll drop that relationship and then pick it up again. Does it work that well in that setup, or is it really better to go in fully and commit?
I would say it's better to go in and commit, because you can actually train somebody up. You don't want to waste time training somebody for a short period of time unless they're doing some really basic work. You want them to work in the way that you work, provide the papers in the way you like to have them. So concentrating and having one person to work with to begin with, I think, is the best way of going in. I mean, the businesses are normally quite flexible in in understanding that there is a variation in your workload that you could discuss with them. But if you go in and you're just going on the hourly rate, or just somebody that you've got all different people working, you'll probably have more of experience that Dean has had, where you haven't really got that consistency, and they may not be delivering the work in the way you want it to. Whereas obviously Ariona's got a very different experience because she's got a team of people. There's consistency. And if you want that consistency, if you want the better result, then I would suggest you go in start with an FTE. A lot of the firms will give you a free trial to start off with, so you can actually see what the work is going to be like before you actually make a commitment.
But it's best not to take this as in the view of, I'm looking for someone, I'll just use this outsourcing service as that stopgap. It is a more fundamental change.
Unless possibly for the more basic work. But if you're looking for some more advanced services, then I don't think I would just drop in and drop out, unless you're in emergency.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I am very conscious of time, and Dean, how are we doing for questions? Is there?
I think we've probably covered a lot of the questions in the conversations that we've been having. I have picked out one that's quite interesting. I know I'm going to be asking the wrong person in Ariona in this one, because she probably doesn't have any of these types of clients. But how does it work with shoebox clients? Because not all those records can be scanned and sent overseas. How would you handle those?
Yeah, we don't take clients who have shoeboxes. They all will have a license, which they can, take a picture of those receipts, and it goes into a central place. So unfortunately, especially with MTD coming up and things like that, we just don't consider those kind of clients. So for us, that hasn't been an issue. I think when you do decide to go down this route, you need to ensure that your systems are as digital as you can get them. Otherwise, I don't think it would work as well.
Okay, and Kaz, would you agree?
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the companies I work for, we did actually provide scanning services. So we would take the shoeboxes with interesting things in them in the UK and scan them, and then that would be sent out to, or it would then be the processed.
Right. So obviously there needs to be a digital element to that.
Oh yeah,
Wonderful.
Absolutely, yes, yeah.
So in terms of questions, Dean, we have one more, don't we?
Do we, Andy?
Do we want to go to the poll? I believe we do. I'm sure you wrote it down on my.
You caught me by surprise there, Andy. Yes, we do have one more poll question that I shall make live. There we go. So, after attending this webinar, have you changed your opinion on outsourcing? So the options are: yes, I am more likely to consider outsourcing, having heard what you've heard today. Yes, but you are less likely to consider outsourcing, having watched the webinar, or your opinion is currently unchanged. It'd be interesting to see whether we've managed to change anyone's opinions or not today.
So I'm just looking through, we've had some questions here, and I'm going to need to put my glasses on, about, does outsourcing work in a real-time environment?
So our team, as I said, work as if they are in the UK. So there is no difference. If a client calls, we have clients who say, I need an invoice raised within half an hour. They will do the same thing as they did before. They'd send it in, it gets done, and it's available for them straight away. So definitely it can do, but again, that depends on your processes that you have in place.
Yeah, I think there's a very clear lessons coming from you on this. Okay, I'm conscious of time. We're coming up to the hour, so how are we doing? Have we had an impact?
I think we've certainly changed some people's minds. So we've got 35% of respondents and growing are more likely to consider outsourcing, having heard what they've heard today. But a sizable number, over half of the people, have had their opinion unchanged. But some of those opinions would have been for it as well. So.
Yeah, but the hardcore, was it 10%? Are they still there?
We've actually got two people who are now less likely to consider having heard what they've heard. Yeah.
Excellent, fantastic, good stuff. That is absolutely wonderful. I think we've come to the end of time. I really appreciate you for joining us, watching, but certainly. Ariona, thank you so much for coming in. It's a shame you couldn't bring the little baby in. Ariona, congratulations. Had a little baby boy, what was his name?
Marco,
earlier on this year. Fantastic, which is why she was missing from our screen. And thank you so much, Kaz, as well, for joining us. Really, really insightful. We will be back in webinar land. It's possibly going to be late May or early June. We don't have a definite date, but we're going to be taking a look at other solutions to the staffing crisis, about how you can retain and attract better staff, or staff more effectively, I should say. But we will, all four of us will be here, we'll be at Accountex on XL 10th and 11th of May in London. So please come and see us if you're there. I think, Ariona, you're speaking at a couple of sessions, and Kaza will be around, and I'm sure she'll be coming to our stand as well. So please come and say hello if you're coming to Accountex. On that note, I'll thank everyone once again. Thank you so much, Dean, Kaz, Ariona, and we will see you at the next one.
You have been listening to the TaxCalc podcast of the TaxCalc webinar, Outsourcing, Advice, Anecdotes, Answers. The presenters were Andy North and Dean Shepherd, with special guests Kaz Driver and Ariona Bericurte. The producers were John Davis and Tom Holmes. The original webinar was broadcast on the 19th of April 2023 and can be viewed at www.taxcalc.com/events. Please be aware that deadlines, rates, and other technical details referenced may have changed since this date.